nice to have. So that's
Okay.
my rationales for those that are.
Okay, so the motion is to remove completely the Rocktopia wall replacement. Those in favor? Those in opposed? Okay, it's defeated with, right, is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
McCallum, Sanford,
Sorry.
Hillstad, Seaweed.
Nice to have.
So it stays in. for
Stays in.
2020.
Stays in.
It stays in.
It was nice.
That's nice. It's a nice to have.
Nice to have.
Okay, so now we are moving to the top of page 10
I'm gonna
and
move,
into the facilities department.
I'll move that project detail sheet 78, the CRC Zamboni refurbish and replace, be pulled from the capital budget,
Pulled or deferred? Or
deferred
Deferred to what year?
to another year.
To another year. Okay, you want to speak to that? It's an A project from administration's perspective.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna suggest that we wait till another year. That's something that I think can wait.
Okay, so respectfully, facilities disagrees, so the Zamboni is quite old, and we don't have a choice, so we have the Olympia for one surface and the Zamboni for the other. We don't have the option of moving one back and forth to service both sheets. We have already done, or essentially we're already pushing the life cycle, so this was the cheapest option we had for the Zamboni, which was essentially to invest some dollars into it to extend its life by another 10 years. If we don't do that, we're likely going to look at it's going to fail, and then we will need to replace it at a much higher cost. So this was essentially an asset management necessary to keep it serviceable for another 10 years.
So I read through all that information, and I agree that it should be a priority, and A is the right place for it. I don't know what else we could do. It seems a reasonable expense.
Any other discussion? Councillor Mayor?
My understanding that we'll get another 10 years life out of this, doing this refurbishment? And
That's
a new
correct.
one, correct? And it's 180,000 to purchase a brand new one?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I think it's a good value to get another 10 years.
So originally, facilities had requested the purchase of a new Zamboni, or essentially to replace it with an Olympia, and we told them no, find a way to limp it along for as long as possible, and this was how they were able to do that.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking back to when was it the Zamboni that was purchased through the Bad Boys or the Olympia? I mean, it's an ideal opportunity for community fundraising. In the same way that the parents at OLS raised, how much did they raise for that playground?
200,000?
Hey?
I think 200,000.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think it's something that we could suggest become a community fundraising opportunities to replace that machine.
Any other comments regarding the motion to, I'm going to suggest that that would be a deferral by a year or two?
Yeah.
I guess just on the community fundraising opportunities, that's a pretty big ask. The Big Bad Boys had a very good fundraising, and they did it the first time. They could potentially do it again, but I think there's other things that are smaller that might better fit that category.
Can you call the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated.
Um,
I'm gonna also move the similar amendment on project sheet 80, the energy return unit replacement. Pretty much exactly the same. Try to go another year or two without that, so move to defer it to another capital year.
So can I just make a comment on how we do the overall capital budget? So we don't fund capital the way we fund operating, which is we look at it year over year. So most of the departments actually have a 10-year capital plan. What we actually bring to council is a 6-year capital plan. So the challenge in moving forward, as Mayor Borman is suggesting, so on especially small projects, if you simply move it from one year to the next within the 6-year envelope, we still have to fund it. So Rick still has to go through and identify a funding source for it. It doesn't change the overall envelope. So we don't actually realize savings in the overall capital envelope by moving a project from 2019 to 2020, because we still have to fund it from the same pot of money, essentially. So if I could make a recommendation or a suggestion to council, it would be look for projects that you either want to remove entirely, or look at differently, but to simply move a project from one year to the next within the capital budget doesn't actually result in a savings of dollars. Sorry,
Fair enough.
Yep.
Just to have that clarification.
Okay. Did you want to speak at all to
Well, we
that
were
energy
talking earlier
return
about
unit?
the fungibility of money and how, if we want to reduce the overall budget, the operating side, then there has to be an offset on the capital side. So if I'm trying to reduce the overall budget by a few $100,000.
Then again, the suggestion is look for projects that you would like to have removed entirely, and then we can do that. But if you just move from 2019 to 2020, we use the same funding model for, in fact, the entire 6 years. So we have to identify a funding source for every project within the 6 years in order to be able to know what impact we could have on taxes, essentially. In other words, what we could transfer to operating.
So essentially what you're saying is council shouldn't remove anything from the capital budget.
No, what I'm saying is that you should remove things from the capital budget if you decide, but you should not defer them. So unless you're going to defer them outside of the 6-year window. So you could say, move it from 2019 to 2025, and that would result in a reduction in the total capital envelope. And so then we could work with that potentially, although that will have impacts because 2025 will then be very lumpy. But if you simply defer it within the 6-year window from 2019 to 2020, for example, we still have to fund that from the existing pot of money. And so it doesn't actually result in a reduction.
And it doesn't necessarily reduce taxes or the tax base. The reduction of taxes would be reducing your contribution to capital, whether it's through reserves or through that transfer to operating.
Right.
Any project can be funded practically by anything, not quite, but so that's the game. That's the test.
I think what we're saying is,
Try again.
that we will, yes, that was it, thank you. Admin will do that work. If council gives us direction about which projects to remove, we'll do the work of what's funded how to be able to make the reduction that council is looking for.
Right, and in the 6-year, the longer budget that Mike was talking about, it may require deferring something from that 6-year window out to a
Outside
further.
That's
So
right.
it's an exercise that admin would have to go through.
That's right.
That's right.
So if you want to defer a project, then the deferral would have to be outside of the 6-year window to have an impact that
Or
we could then
defer
capture.
this project to the next few years, and something else gets deferred out a few years outside of the 6, so there's a domino effect on that.
Yes, that is correct. And, yes,
So we
deferring
have-
it 1 year reduces the capital spend in the first year, but increases it in the second year. That's the, unless you defer something else out of the second year. So, yeah, there can be this domino effect, yeah.
But by the same token, if we defer something from year 1 to year 2, we're looking at a 6.6% tax rate increase in year 1 and a 3.0% tax increase in year 2. But it sort of tends to equalize it. If you take something out of year 1 and put it into year 2, you're actually smoothing it.
Right. But capital works differently than operating in that a move from year 1 to year 2 doesn't have the direct impact that it has in operating. So if you remove something from operating, you transfer 100,000 from operating from year 1 to year 2, it has an immediate impact on the tax rate. Within capital, how we work is within essentially a funding envelope, and then with looking at all of our funding sources. So if we move something from year 1 to year 2, it may still have the same funding source in year 2 as it did in year 1, in which case it makes no discernible impact whatsoever on the budget.
Yes and no. The capital budget is funded from taxes partially.
Yes.
So
that 5% or whatever. that
5%,
we will put in.
$960,000 of tax revenue goes into capital budget every year. Plus, we have the franchise fees, which we discussed, that a portion of, or all of, whatever council desires, could be removed from capital and directed to operating. So those decisions, so, I mean, Rick's correct, just moving within the budget does nothing unless you take that corresponding funding source.
And that was
move
the
it into
starting
operating.
point at the beginning of the day.
Right.
Is identified that. I want to be able to pull some of the Fortis fees into the operating budget, and we understand then that means there's got to be a displacement within the capital budget. So that was the starting point.
Okay,
So
so
then-
if I could clarify, you are looking for, because I don't think that's a universal understanding, that what council is trying to do is remove capital projects from here with the resultant funding being diverted to operating. If that's the discussion,
Yeah.
then I think we just need to have that
Right, and-
understanding.
So I wanted to get through this capital discussion before putting the amending motion forward around the Fortis fees, but if it makes more sense to do that first, then,
Well, and what I
because
was, I
that
mean,
would inform the way that Fortis fee is split.
you can do it either way. I mean, essentially what I was suggesting is go through now and identify if there are changes in the priorities within the capital budget that you would like. So if there's a project, you could give us direction to transfer on the Fortis fees, for example, to affect the operating, or the transfer from operating to capital. And you could still say, actually, I really don't like this project, I want it taken out, regardless of whether or not it affects the tax increase. So both processes are important and worthwhile for you to go through and identify if there are projects that you don't agree with and you would like to deprioritize, and then to give us the overall direction of how much you would like to save in capital in order to impact operating. Does that make sense? So you could give us overall direction that you want to save $300,000 in operating to be found from capital. That's one piece of direction that we can then take away. And at the same time, you could say, and as part of that, maybe not all of that, but as part of that, I want to deprioritize this particular project. So look for some of that savings in this project.
Which is kind of what we're doing.
Right, but I don't think that was well understood
Right.
for
I
everyone.
think everybody understood that perfectly well, didn't you? Well, I understood it.
I thought I understood it, and now it's over-explained.
But this is also why I'm suggesting that simply deferring a project from one year to the next doesn't actually
Do that.
accomplish that.
Right.
So you want to go through and prioritize which projects you may want to find savings from,
Yeah.
and then give us overall direction.
So effectively, if council, or if the finance committee moves a project from one year to the next, that's deprioritizing it.
Not if it remains funded.
Okay, I think we're gonna continue on. And I think, so we have, Mayor Borelman, a motion on the floor to defer the energy return unit replacement. Elevation Place Energy Return Unit Replacement. Is there any other discussion from council on that motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll move the question. Those in favor of deferring? Councillor Mira, and those opposed? Okay, so that's defeated with Mayor Borman and Councillor Mira in support. Okay, Councillor Seeley?
Just on the fundraising opportunity, I'm wondering about projects 88 and 96. If we could, I guess my thoughts on that would, we might be able to empower the users to fundraise for those and defer until they can come up with funding. They're not big ticket items, but I think it's reasonable that they may be able to do that.
So that may be a way of finding money, is to essentially deprioritize them to a D, saying they're funding source dependent. So go out and find another funding source other than the ones we are currently using, of which fundraising could be an example.
Yeah, and as I understood it, the air conditioning's roughed in, and that could be added at some point in the future, so.
So what, is that your motion?
Yeah.
To put it as a D project, as
Depending on,
unfunded?
Great, can you say that again? Which one?
The, well, we're talking specifically about the CRC air conditioning unit, main floor gym, project 88. It's, well, let's do one at a time. So project 88, Canmore Rec Center air conditioning unit. So that is adding an air conditioning to the gymnastics area.
now, could I add a fundraising component to that, just to suggest that as a
Well,
possible?
we would suggest that to users, but we can't compel, basically, we wouldn't deliver the project unless
Okay,
a funding source became available. And we would have to come back to council to say that, you know, we've worked with users to get the fundraising, or a special grant has come available or something like that.
And further, administration doesn't currently have resources available to lead or coordinate a fundraising effort,
No.
Right.
right? So we're not, there's nobody in charge of leading fundraising. So if we make this as a contingent on fundraising, then we could communicate that to the user groups, but then it would be entirely up to them whether or not
Sure.
they decided to make the initiative and move forward with that.
So I have a whole, no, did I lose my question? Would it be possible also to consider, thank you, the Olympia replacement? That's an actual replacement of a Zamboni, and I know that that's not in 19 or 20, but when we're talking about a fundraising component, could we consider perhaps 50% being other and 50% being from reserve? Or
Okay,
are we
well,
not allowed
let's,
to talk about that right now?
well, we can go to that
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
Joanna, but let's,
Yeah, okay.
let's
and
do
Councillor
that.
McCallum, I think that gets a little dangerous, because that's something that needs to be done, so if fundraising doesn't happen, then we could be in a bad position with the Zamboni.
So, let's stick with
Okay.
the,
Oh, actually, my other question was, did they have air, you've got creeps. Did they have air conditioning before, or is this, I don't recollect.
this is an
This
enhancement.
is
No,
an
this
enhancement.
is an
Okay,
enhancement.
thank you very much, that's helpful information.
Okay,
I
Councillors?
just wrote notes on my sheet when we had the presentation that they want to do this work while the building's being renovated, because it makes more sense. Is that correct?
There is an opportunity to do it now. However, as Councillor Seeley pointed out, it is roughed in, so we can also do it at a later date. So there might be some minor efficiency in terms of doing it now, because we've got a contractor in site and we can add it to the existing work. But we can also do it at a later date through our regular procurement process.
okay,
But we
so,
can't coordinate a fundraising effort, raising effort.
we are not coordinating the
Right.
fundraising. We will,
It's called access.
we will inform the users that it, should this motion pass, that council did not fund the project, and if they would see it as an important amenity, they will need to fundraise it for it. So on Councillor Seeley's motion to move the CRC air conditioning unit to a D project being unfunded, those in favor? Opposed? It's carried with Councillor Sanford opposed. No, he was in favor.
You're gonna leave that, right, Rob?
Okay, and then, did you want to go to the next one? Rob had put out the scoreboard as well.
Oh, question?
Yes?
Does the current scoreboard work?
Yeah.
Okay, so it works, it's just not fancy,
Yeah, it goes into trouble every once
but
in a
it
while.
works,
Most of the time.
just like me.
Yes.
Okay,
Like me.
thank you.
So,
Okay, so
like-
that project was number, sorry, I've lost.
96.
What were you gonna say, Mr. Farr?
96.
So the original clock is from 1983.
Yes.
Right, and so it is at the end of its useful life. We are managing to limp it along, but like everything, the cost to repair and to maintain goes up. So it is identified as something to be life cycled.
Are there such thing as used clocks?
No.
Oh, really? Okay.
There are such things as sponsored clocks.
That's
So
what I'm
in the
thinking.
second
Yes.
arena, the
was
clock is
sponsored.
sponsored by Canbo Motors.
Yes.
Perfect opportunity.
So, although we used to have a sponsorship consultant, and we do have a sponsorship policy, we no longer have a contract with that consultant. So that is work that administration doesn't have the capacity to do, go out and find sponsorships, but potentially if the community is aware that,
Big bad boys might want to jump
You
in.
know, I think Hillstead Roofing Club.
How timely.
okay, so Councillor Seeley, your motion is to create this as an unfunded project as well?
Yes.
Any discussion on that?
I just want to say I can support that. It seems like a perfect opportunity for a local business to step up.
It's a good price point.
Yeah. And you get long-term recognition.
Okay, call the question. Those in favor? That's unanimous.
The Hillstatt Sealy
Question.
clock.
I have a philosophical question, and as we move through this list, Mr. Farr, since you presented this, and I think that the solar strategy is a very interesting one, especially based on the presentation that we had from those university students. But if we had to play choose this, not that, in terms of the most level of, the highest level of impact, with regards to our solar, and understanding that if you take away the solar initiatives, that there's actually a corresponding financial repercussion from that, which would be the one that you would choose? Would you choose EP over the senior center, Arts Place, and the Roundhouse combined?
At the end of the day, so EP is our largest energy consumer in the community by far, right? And so the ability to impact the energy there, and obviously, given the size of the system that we can put on there, it can have a significant benefit. But at the end of the day, a kilowatt of solar is a kilowatt of solar, regardless of which facility it is on. So we have an ambitious solar program here, and that is to respond to a council priority and to the previous discussion we had around the impacts of climate change. If council felt that they still wanted to address it, but slightly less aggressively, then those are projects we could choose to do one or two less of those.
Another question. So with the EP solar system, this $430,000 represents a full system?
Well, it's a 212 kilowatt system, I believe was the number that was associated, which is a very large system.
Yeah.
It still does not come close to providing all the power required for an elevation place.
So is that, and excuse my not lack of understanding of the subject matter, so if you were to half that system, what would be the impact of that? And necessarily, I guess, half the system from a footprint perspective versus half the system from a cost perspective.
Right. So cutting the system in half would essentially cut the cost of it in half, more or less. It's almost a direct correlation. And the result would be, it would produce less energy, so it would have less of an impact on future electricity rates and less of an impact on future GHG.
But can you add on to that system as you go, or would it be easier to, would it be easier to add on, on individual buildings?
It is possible to add, so they are scalable. It is possible to add additional infrastructure at a later date. So you could do a smaller system now and then do more later on. Again, for efficiencies, what I would probably suggest is do less buildings or spread them out over a longer period of time, rather than do a smaller system on a particular building, because if you've got to have a contractor get up on the roof, there is cost and efficiency associated with that.
So,
and is there a reason why EP is chosen before the other little buildings?
Because it is our largest consumer of energy, so it's our biggest opportunity to have the large impact quickly.
And so that's my question. So you would think that then keeping EP would be more important, more impactful than doing individual buildings?
So if we were going to prioritize, I would prioritize EP over even 2 or 3 of the other projects, yes.
well, and it's the larger project. So it's, I think like money, or it's fungible, right? It's a kilowatt of energy, it's a kilowatt of energy.
But I understand also how it's like the money is fungible, and it's coming from a combination of grants and reserves. So we would want, are we confident of the grants that are going to be available in 2020?
I think we're using MSI grants. It's MSI grants.
Oh, okay, so it's not any of the, are we eligible for any of the provincial grants?
There are green grants that are currently available that we would certainly be applying for.
I know those provincial or federal?
Provincial. And so we will have to see after the election how much of those. So we took a conservative approach, and MSI, we have a higher degree of confidence in, so that's where we wanted it from.
Okay.
If we got other specific grants available, we would take advantage of those.
So, and I think it's important to point out, while Mike did say this was a priority of council, it's not a priority of council, it's a goal of council.
Yeah.
And it's certainly in response to the recent report on climate change. And, so it's an important project to do, but it is good discussion for council to look at your priorities, and for example, your priority of waste reduction versus, carbon greenhouse gas reduction. So both projects, solar and organics, the goal is to reduce your greenhouse gas generation, right? So both of those projects are essentially under the environmental sustainability goal, but council has identified organics management as the priority.
Right. You said that project's funded out of MSI?
Yes,
The capital sheet shows it under, being funded out of reserve.
EP is out of general. The other ones are.
I thought we were talking about EP.
again,
But
it's,
all.
yeah, we can fund any project from grants and any project from, I mean, there are specific reserves like the photo radar reserve where we're restricted what we can fund, but we can use our MSI for pretty much any capital project council wants to use it for.
Sure, because normally on this sheet, it shows funded from grants,
Yep.
not reserve.
Yep, so sorry, some of them are funded from grants, some of the solar projects are funded from grants, some are
The
funded.
ones in 2020, all three of them are funded through MSI.
But the
The-
one in
The
2019,
19 one is funded out of general capital.
So can't we flip that? Can't we fund?
Yes, we can.
Yes, you
Yeah,
absolutely can.
so you can
That's what we keep
fund,
saying, we
Right,
can,
right.
yeah, yeah.
That's right.
funding is
And does it have any impact on taxation? No.
zero.
Zero.
So, but, to the point, if you reduce the overall solar initiative by 200,000 or 300,000, right? We can do that, and then we will work on the funding, and we can find a way to do that so that we can have a corresponding reduction on the transfer from operating to capital, right? So we can do that. So this is why we're saying it doesn't matter which project. Basically, if you want to give the direction to reduce the solar initiative by a dollar amount, we'll figure out how to do it.
So Councillor McCallum, do you want to make a motion?
I'm still struggling to wrap my head around it. What I'm trying to do is to have, as my colleague next to me has articulated before, more of a smoothing effect on these capital projects, understanding that in 2020, we have a 3% tax increase. So if we can bring one down and bring the other up in terms of the capital projects, that doesn't work.
No, so again.
So, I mean, you're pushing one forward, so you were increasing the capital envelope in 2020 to accommodate for that.
Right, but
project
again,
being pushed
it's
forward.
not the same as in operating. So in capital, we fund an envelope over the full 6 years, right? And so just moving it within the 6 years doesn't have the same impact as it does on operating when we move from 2019 to 2020. What we're saying to you, again, it's actually not that complicated, is if you want to reduce the solar initiative, say, reduce the solar initiative by 200,000, and we'll find a way to do that that has a corresponding impact on tax. We will do the funding behind the scenes. But I think it might be easier for council if you take the funding source equation out of the conversation when you're looking at these projects. Because it just confuses them. There are, with very few exceptions, for example, some of the transportation projects are Green Trip funded. And that Green Trip money isn't available for any other type of project. So those might be a different type of conversation. But for anything that's funded out of reserves and MSI, and operating reserves MSI, it's not necessary for you to concern yourself with the funding source at this time, because we can do that behind the scenes.
Okay, so is there a motion?
No, I don't have anything apparently. It's too complex for me.
The other way, and what we were talking about, and this is potentially an easier way for council to think about it. If you want to go back to your discussion around operating and what tax increase you're willing to accept for 2019 and 2020, and you can give us the direction to pull it out of capital. So, and I think we had this discussion at the beginning of the morning that, you know, if you want to pull $300,000 out of operating in 2019 or bring $300,000 of revenue from the capital budget into the operating budget in 2019, then you have to do that each year. So what we're looking for is $300,000 worth of projects each year, every single year. So if you gave us that motion to begin with, if that's where council wants to end up, under 5%, and you want to take it from capital, then we should start with that motion. I think this is why we're confusing, and then we can come back here and you can tell us what projects are less important to you versus others, and we can come back to you with a revised capital plan. But if that's the basis of all of this, if the only reason you're looking at capital is to reduce your tax increase in 2019, then I think we should start with that motion. and understand where you want to get and get settled on that.
Okay, so how does the conversation around the forest levies inform that?
Well, that's kind of where I was
Because the
going. I was trying to find corresponding.
$1 million every year
I know, but,
is coming in from Fortis.
so in the interest of reducing the tax impact below 5%, and using the Fortis fees in some way, what we've been trying to do is find the balance in the capital budget.
Right.
And you're saying that's too complicated, don't do that.
No, I'm saying give us the first motion. Give us the target, and then we can come back to this capital budget. But right now, everybody's saying, well, some people are saying they're comfortable with 6%. Some people are saying they're comfortable with what they saw as the impact to the
Yeah, so
overall
what
house, right?
Where I want to get to is using the Fortis fees to offset the overall cost to reduce the budget or the tax impact below 5%.
Okay,
And I
so
think she's
If that's as
suggesting just
simple
make
as-
that as a motion.
make that as a
If
motion.
that's the motion, I'm happy to put that forward.
Okay. So if you could give us the target, what is below 5%? Is it 5%? Is it 4.9?
Below 5%.
Well, what,
Well, let's start with 4.6.
Actually, I had a motion I was going to make.
4.6?
Let's start with 4.6. I mean, it's
hoping for
nice, it's a nice, well, she left the door open for me. So it's a nice, easy 2%.
So 2%. So you're looking for $460,000
Right.
of Fortis franchise fees to be
Applied
applied
in some way.
into the operating budget for 2019 and every year beyond.
Right, that's the motion.
And every year beyond?
And every year
Right,
behind.
every year.
Okay.
So I have a question about that. So my understanding was we were looking at 6.6 for next year, but 3% for
Right.
the year after.
Right.
How does that, like, do we have to make a motion about that as well?
No?
Because you're saying that if we take it out of 2019, we have to take it out of successive years. So that would make an impact on 2020, would it not?
Not on the operating.
It'll
Oh,
reduce
okay.
the capital envelope,
Gotcha,
but the operating will remain the same.
okay. Thank you.
Well. So let's bring up Rick's calculator.
Yeah.
It would be easier to start there in the first place. That way we're trying to get there by working through the capital.
Well, we went through operating and there were no motions brought forward.
Okay,
the-
so what Mayor Borelman suggested is we pull out $460,000 in year one. And we would need to pull it out every year following that. So if you pull it out in so this would, and when I say pull it out, I mean we're adding $460,000 from Fortis franchise fees as revenue into the operating budget every year. So you'll see your future years stay the same because your base every year is dropped.
Sure,
Yep.
so that's the amendment, recognizing that in future, Fortis fees are gonna continue to increase.
Yes,
There's still, at this point, $540,000 going from Fortis fees into capital, into reserves.
correct.
And that can grow, but the philosophy is based on the application of the other reserves, the other fees, I mean, Fortis and ATCO, the ATCO fees historically, which are 100% towards operating, towards
Capital.
operating. So that decision was made at some point by council saying, here's another source of revenue, ATCO. We can offset the tax source of revenue by using these fees. And essentially what we're saying with this motion is we should apply, if we could apply the same philosophy or approach to the Fortis fees as the ATCO. So we have different sources of revenue. Fees are one of them, fees, taxes are another. They're all revenue, money's fungible. So if we move some of the fees into the big bucket and are able to reduce the demand on tax revenue, then I think that's worth exploring.
Okay, so your motion is to reduce the Fortis fee transfer to reserve, transfer to capital reserve by $460,000 in each of the
Well,
year.
to Rick's point, I think maybe the easiest way to do is just to say, the motion is to reduce the transfer to capital by $460,000 a year.
That's what I just said.
But you said from the Fortis fees, and I'm saying take the Fortis fees out of the question, as Rick suggested, and just say reduce the transfer to capital by $460,000 a year, and then we can manage afterwards.
Right now, the transfer to capital is,
Use your mic, please.
oh, sorry. Just take the word Fortis fees out of it,
Yeah.
or depending how we want to say it. But the transfer to capital is 1.1 million. And it's now going to be 1.1 less 460.
Yes.
And then that's what it becomes.
Right.
Because Fortis fees change.
Yeah, on
That amount becomes
a yearly
fixed.
basis.
I think it's semantics, it's, the revenue source is franchise fees, right? That's what,
Well, but I think Rick's suggestion is have the franchise fees, all franchise fees, ATCO and Fortis, go into operating, clear and straightforward, and then reduce what you're transferring to capital every year by $460,000. And that's it.
That gets to the same point.
It gets to the same
So
point, but it's,
the motion is clear, though, that the source of revenue is the fees.
Yeah.
That's
yes,
the important part of the motion.
yeah,
yes,
So if the motion is worded in that way.
as long as the administration understands how it works.
yes.
Yeah.
To take all of the Fortis fees and put them into the operating, and then transfer less 460 to capital.
That's right.
So which one are we recording that we're moving 460 of the Fortis franchise fees into, or
So all
reducing
100%
the
of-
transfer to capital?
So I think that, as I understand it, the motion is to dedicate 100% of the, or dedicate all of the Fortis fees into operating, and then transfer everything except $460,000 to capital.
Anyways,
That's
pre-
the number.
well, I just think what we're looking for is $460,000 of Fortis franchise fees to be used to fund operating.
Yes,
And
Okay.
how we work that in the budget,
yes. We'll sort that out.
that is what you said.
That's what I
So,
said?
that is what you said. So, open it up to discussion and debate, sorry, from
So
others.
initially, I thought you said all franchise fees. Sorry.
Pardon me?
Initially, I thought you said all franchise fees. So you're just saying the money should come from Fortis
Well,
franchise fees.
the other fees already go to operating,
Yeah.
100%.
That's what I understood.
ATCO fees, yeah. So we're only talking about the Fortis fees now, change there.
Okay, got it, I'm clear.
Okay,
No, I'll turn mine off.
my question is our future budget predicated on the accumulation of those Fortis fees in the budget over time? The way we have been budgeting those fees is what you have in your capital sheets up till 2024, because that's where the money's coming from.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So the short answer is by doing this, we reduce the amount of money available for capital by $460,000 a year every year.
So between now and the next finance committee meeting, administration will do some work, and that will include reducing the capital budget. So we'll have to bring back to you a revised capital budget that shows those reductions over the years.
So to 2024, if
Yes.
we're talking that long.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
that took $2.7 million out of our capital envelope, out of the general capital asset replacement reserve.
That's based on no increase to the Fortis fees.
That's right.
Yes.
But
They
that's
are gonna
also
increase.
contingent on not transferring that capital from operating.
Yeah.
But we could choose to transfer that capital from operating.
And sorry, and just to respond to Mayor Barnes' comment, they may increase, they may not. This year, they decreased. And so we cannot be certain of the increase or the rate at which they will increase. So this year, they are substantially lower than what they had projected for last year. It's kind of like housing prices. You assume that over a long enough timeline, they will always go up. But they don't always go up. In Canmore, we saw that and then it took a number of years to catch back up to the point where we were previously. So I just want to have a slight word of caution on the expectation that they will always go up and at a significant rate.
they've gone up for the last whatever number of years, so.
Until they didn't.
I haven't seen them not go up.
What, housing prices?
No, we're talking about Fortis fees.
Oh.
And don't we set the fees, or how's that work?
No.
Well, so that is a good discussion. You can increase them, yes. And we have to do that prior to this point in time in the budget year. But in the fall, you can request that Fortis and ATCO increase the franchise fees. We have to advertise that in the paper, and you have to do a bylaw, but we can do that. So that is something we could consider in future years.
So there.
That's interesting. Okay, so the motion is on the floor. I think everybody understands what it is, and we're right at the stroke of 12. So is there any further discussion on that?
I'd like to
Councillor
make an
McDonald?
amendment.
Sure.
I'd like to make that number $230,000, please. And that would bring us down to 5.6, which brings us down a percentage point lower. And I think actually gutting our capital, 6-year capital of $2.4 million scares the crap out of me based on what's actually in the capital plan.
We haven't,
Sorry.
finish your amending motion. Yeah, finish, but you can do it.
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna.
Okay, I wasn't sure why
butt in.
you're interrupting me. And so the 6-year capital, pardon me? Okay, amendments on the floor, sorry. I thought I.
Speaking
Does
to
this
the
not work?
amendment.
Okay, I
Speaking to
just
the amendment,
speaking
yeah.
to it.
Yep.
What's going on? Anyways, I think that gutting our 6-year capital plan by $2.4 million over the next 6 years based on what's in that capital plan is quite scary. And we've been talking over the last 3 or 4 years about how we've been using growth to mitigate our tax spend. And unfortunately, we're seeing the result of that this year. So that's my amendment.
So, to the amendment, I won't support it. I'd like to see the work done to inform this motion, and that allows us then to back off a little bit. But I also would suggest that we're not gutting the capital budget. I think that's overstated. There's an expectation that the six-year capital budget will be affected, that's clear. But gutting it, I don't think that's a reasonable descriptor. In any case, I would like to see the original motion carried forward, see what they bring back, and then if council's not comfortable, back off on it. So for that reason, I won't support your amendment.
Any other comment on the amendment? So the amendment is to reduce the 460 to 230?
Can I?
Yep.
Question through the chair to the mayor. Why 4.6? Why not 4.7? Why not, is it just round numbers?
It was a nice round number.
Round numbers, okay, thank you.
I just wanted to get the ball rolling, see where it goes.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure if there's actually anything that informed that number, and
Nothing
it's just a
specific.
round number.
Nice
Okay.
round number.
Okay, so on the amending motion, those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, so the amendment is defeated with Councillor Hillstead and Councillor in favor. And then on the main motion, the original motion for transferring 460,000 of the Fortis fees into the operating budget. Any further discussion? Okay, those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Same answers. Okay, so my mic's not on, sorry. What administration will do based on that motion is look back to the capital plan, look to the available funding envelope, and bring you a new capital plan at the Thursday
Just
meeting.
one last suggestion, which will help you do that exercise. An amending motion on the ACA land transfer to pull that. I'm not supportive of what's suggested in this project.
Okay, you wanted to
Page
make that motion
106.
before we adjourn?
Yeah, so then that can inform the next part of your work.
And is that to strike that completely?
Yes? I think it'll be a dog's breakfast. I'm not that interested in moving forward with the town managing that conservation easement.
Any discussion on that?
What would be the alternative?
Don't know.
And it's not our,
Province can take it like they're taking the other chunk, or the Alberta Conservation Association can work with some other.
so they could transfer to
entity.
some other organization?
Right now, it's theirs. They're managing the conservation easement, which isn't going that well, so they want to walk away and let the municipality deal with it.
So there could be another agency similar to that
Yeah,
organization?
it's a small chunk, and it's not even that certain that there's that much value to it in the overall scheme. I know there's consideration being given on the lower Silvertip corridor at the provincial level. So at this point, I'm not, did you want to jump in?
All I would say is that the alternative is to leave the land unmanaged, essentially. So there isn't another organization that would step in. The message to the ACA would be to leave the land unmanaged.
And there would be impact on our community, how?
Well, right
That's-
now, there's a number of braided trails and sort of unauthorized, or not unauthorized, but
Informal trails.
unmanaged use there, but it's being used by residents of the neighborhood for passive recreation purposes.
The short answer is we don't know either impact to the community or to wildlife. It's very difficult to quantify. As Mayor Bowerman points out, the whole lower Silvertip wildlife corridor, it's questionable whether or not that is effective or it is not. The conservation easement doesn't give them a choice. It's essentially saying you must do it, whether it's useful or not. And so, but it may be that if we manage to get traction with the province, we will learn that it's not appropriate to have that as a corridor and it should be unmanaged. So this is a difficult one. The ACA does not want to manage it anymore. So the alternative is to leave it unmanaged, the impacts of which are impossible for administration to quantify at this time, whether it has an impact on wildlife. What we do know is that people who are using it currently will continue to use it if it is unmanaged.
And do we have authority to enforce any of our bylaws on that land currently, if it's under the ACA? Or enforce bylaws if we take it over?
So it's within the municipal boundary currently, so yes, off-leash dog bylaws, for example, we could enforce. Although, actually, no, sorry, because it's private land, we do not have enforcement ability on private land, so no, we would not.
I think we can get agreements to allow us to enforce on those lands.
Yeah.
So it doesn't require a land transfer for us to do that, in other words?
No, it does not require a land transfer for us to do enforcement on it, but I guess the point would be if we are not taking responsibility for the management of the lands, then the lands would remain unmanaged.
Councillor Gilbert?
I just wonder what the chances are of getting AEP to take it over if they take over the other parcel.
We have heard from them that they're not interested at all
Yeah.
in that parcel.
Essentially none.
Does that mean that they're okay with it being left unmanaged? I mean, is there any penalty that might accrue to the town of Canmore?
We have not had those conversations with the AEP, so I can't answer that.
Thanks.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to strike that project off of the capital plan completely. Seeing no further discussion, those in favor? It's carried unanimously. And then I'll make a motion to adjourn the finance committee meeting. Those in favor? Carried unanimously.
Next meeting's Thursday?